Hello. So today I wanted to talk about the personal culture aspects of ecosystem. I was reading a book on business, and it was talking about developing culture in your business as a way of working on the underlying structure to promote good outcomes. And then I was thinking about how this relates to one's personal ecosystem. The ecosystem being just a label used to designate the stuff surrounding your life that influences it but isn't direct activity, let's say, or direct projects. So, for example, if your kitchen is on a different floor as your living area, you'll be less likely to go to your kitchen and eat more, so it would be easier to lose weight if you're far away from your fridge. Like, that would be an example of an ecosystem thing that's not directly related to your activity. So, I wanted to discuss the personal culture aspects. And so, this is the non physical related objects. So, or the non external physical stuff. So, the refrigerator example is not one of them. And so, I when I was brainstorming for this, I felt it came down to four categories, and a lot of these categories have stuff that overlaps or influences each other, so it's unclear where stuff should be categorized. But the first off is we're going to talk about is values, because almost all of it just points back to values. Values are generally in some sort of hierarchy in terms of what's most important, and they frame both the type of information you're going to take in. So, for example, if you took a botanist and a geologist to a waterfall uh, out in the Amazon, they're going to both notice completely different things and they're going to find different things interesting as a result of their backgrounds. If you value productivity, you're more likely to notice things related to productivity than if you valued security and stuff of that nature. Values will also be a large determinant in how you autopilot your life. If you are, let's say, a conscientious like type psychology type, then you're gonna be, more organized. Or you have the tendency to organize your workspace, stuff like that. So, almost everything points back to values in some way. The second thing is also apologies that this picture is the drawings are rather obtuse. I wasn't expecting on using this, but then I thought it was interesting, so why not talk about it? Okay, the second thing is systems. So this is the patterns you have in place that will largely operate on their own or without a high degree of intentionality. So you don't have to be putting your attention and intention into them in order to be getting the, well, not necessarily desired outputs, but the outputs for them. So this includes habits, both habits in terms of what you do and habits in terms of your attention. So I recently read, what is it? James Clear's Atomic Habits book. I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm trying to build the habit of, for example, every time I leave my car, pick out one piece of trash and take it in with me, which is super easy. And if I have that habit, then my car will be clean. There's no, unless I'm bringing in more trash than I'm taking out, which isn't how that works. So I'll have a clean car, right? And so if I get this to the point where I'm doing this without any degree of intentionality, I will have a clean space. So the systems you can put in place will dictate outcomes that you're able to get. Of course, putting a system in place is the hard part, but once it's there, you'll be able to achieve outcomes without exercising will. And then there are other things you can have an inbox, not just like an email inbox, but like a box where you put stuff that you need to work on, and then you work on it and you send it out. To-do lists. I think content production is an interesting system. I'm doing it right now in the sense that I'm making this for YouTube, and if I do this every single week, then eventually it gets to the point where I'm not thinking about it with super high degree of intentionality. Like I'm trying to produce something useful, but I don't have to be intentional about getting to the point where I'm doing the producing. So all the intent is in terms of creating the product, and none of it is for motivating myself to come out there and do it. Okay, the third thing we're going to talk about is things related to the self, and this kind of has a few branches coming out of it. Um, the so there's a cognitive bias to evaluate ourself through stories we tell ourselves, and there's a few studies that highlight this. I can summarize the studies a little bit, but I'm a little hazy on the details. There's one study where they put people's hands in ice water to inflict pain on them, and what they did is, what they discovered was something really interesting is if people are given the choice between having their, I forget the numbers, but having their hand in really cold ice for a minute, or having their hand in really cold ice for a minute, followed by 30 seconds of less cold ice, if you don't tell them the amount of time, they will choose the latter. So they'll choose the extra 30 seconds of discomfort, and that's because towards the end, it was more, or it was less uncomfortable, and people overvalue the recency effect. And so when they tell themselves the story of how uncomfortable it was, it seems less uncomfortable. So what it is there's not, humans have a bad sensitivity towards what our actual lived experience is in terms of processing what's going on. Because obviously 30 extra seconds of discomfort, which is slightly less discomfort, is a worse lived experience, but that people overwhelmingly chose the 30 extra seconds because it had the lower pain at the end is telling. Another story was when people were asked to rank how fulfilling someone's life was, when there's like an accident. So like a woman gets in a car accident and a man rushes to the hospital, and if he gets there in time to say goodbye to like his wife or whatever it was, people would view that as having a more fulfilling, she had a more fulfilling life, even if she died like super young. So if she dies at 26, as long as he gets to say goodbye, they rank it as more fulfilling. Even if related to like if she dies at 76, but he fails to say goodbye, they'll say it's less fulfilling, which is, I mean, you have 50 more years. How could that be less fulfilling? But people don't process it like that. They just process in terms of the story in which they go. So what does this have to do with ecosystem and personal culture? Well, first, if humans have the tendency to underweight lived experience, what you can do is you can try and counterbalance that and build in systems that will try and improve lived experience, because you're assuming that you're going to undervalue it. And so once, for example, you could do meditation, you could do stuff to help with physiological concerns, like being hydrated, having a good diet, getting good sleep. None of those make for good stories, or are dramatic at all, but they'll significantly improve lived experience, and will tend to undervalue those types of things. And the second thing is you can be intentional in terms of curating the stories you tell yourself about what your life is like. I think that exploring that is a topic that can expand out quite a bit, but you can be intentional with that as well. And the third thing to do with identity is congruence, and trying to be the type of person who engages in, you want to have your identity lined up with the other things. And in fact, these four categories I have up here, the way to think about it is you're trying to harmonize and get congruence with all these different things, even though there's a ton of overlap. So you want your systems to be congruent with your values. You want your identity to be congruent with your values. You want your identity to inform your systems. You want your stylization to be a reflection of your values, etc. So like it's about establishing cohesion in terms of like when you're trying to find what the normative task is. And there's so much to unpack in terms of identity. It really can't be done here, but the idea is you're thinking about how to be intentional in regards to your personal culture. So, not your primary task, but how your life is structured and how you think about your life. Okay, so then last we have stylization. And so the first three things that I wrote down for this are glamour, aesthetics, and style. And these are all relatively similar, and there's a bit to unpack in regards to the distinctions, but having some sort of taste and some sort of respect for the way things are, the way in which your life is presented both to yourself and others, seems like a good look. It's a mistake to overlook style completely for the sake of substance, because substance is a form of style. Another way you can stylize your life is examining what role models you have. By having a role model allows you to paint a really clear picture in your mind in terms of what you're shooting at, and just having a heuristic of referring to the role model. Now you have to engage in good modeling techniques. Like, so for example, when Bandler and Grinder were modeling psychologist Fritz Perls, they initially copied everything in Fritz Perls' behavior, including the cigar smoking, and then they slowly removed all the behavior they thought wasn't effective at being a good psychologist, such as cigar smoking, and eventually they came up with what they thought was good. So you have to engage in good modeling, but after you remove the stuff you think is not useful, then you have good models. Hopefully. Then there's mood and attitude. Mood is a bit to unpack, and I don't recall a lot of the information on mood. I know it's related to emotion, but the simple idea is, or the example I was thinking of was people who have a really bro attitude at the gym. That's a way of stylizing your expression and the way you interpret your life, and also the type of emotional response you have to things that's like reflexively are informed by heuristics of like that type of attitude. And I'm not necessarily advocating a bro attitude, but it's just an example. Next is something that actually seems pretty big as vocabulary. The words you use largely determine how you're interpreting your life. If you get into a confrontation with someone and you refer to it as a heated discussion, that interpretation is going to be a lot different than if you say that they violently attacked you. And if you say violently attacked, you'll probably, when recalling it, just have a much more embodied experience than if you say heated discussion. Just like if you say instead, the classic example that Anthony Robbins uses in his book Awaken the Giant Within is using peeved instead of angry or furious or livid or whatever it is. If you use the word peeved, suddenly it's not that angering anymore. And the last thing we have is modality vocabulary. A modality is the types of ways you internally experience, and so if those are changed, then Also, that's going to inform your lived experience. Anyways, running out of time. Good stuff.